As everybody may be aware, if you've been in the club for a couple years or so at least, um, Kristen Allott, it's not a coincidence that her last name is Allott. There's actually a genealogical link there. And she has spoken to our club on a couple other occasions when we were back at Village Inn in the good old days, and nutrition and brain function. And she had a study that I thought was just fascinating regarding decision making and nutrition, and tied to the court system, if I remember correctly,
Yep.
in Washington State. And so she is joining us via Zoom. I pulled her bio off of LinkedIn, and as a physician, highly regarded national speaker and performance consultant, Dr. Kristen Allott is passionate about assisting high-level individuals such as Rotarians, businesses, and government to optimizing brain performance. More than a decade in her medical practice, for more than a decade in her medical practice, she has refined her expertise on how to improve mental functioning by treating the physical causes of mental health. She has also just recently co-authored a book. I don't know if it's the first of that she's done or not, but she's going to tell us more about that as well. It's called Fuel Your Brain, Not Your Anxiety, and a very fitting topic for the world we live in right now. Her presentation today will be focused more on sleep and the necessity of that and how to achieve good sleep. And so I will be listening intently myself. So if you are ready to take control there.
Yeah.
Kristen.
Okay. I will share my screen. So share screen and then put my PowerPoint up. Rotary. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me back, Craig. I always love coming and speaking, and via Zoom. I hope to visit my parents someday soon, but in this reality, this is as close as we're going to get. And so when Craig asked me to speak, one of the things that I have been hearing since the beginning of COVID is that sleep has been really disrupted. And so I thought I would spend a little bit of time talking about that. For those of you who are on Zoom, if you know somebody or you have sleep issues, and then for those of you in the room, you can kind of do this for yourself. But if you want to, the people who are on Zoom, you can put in the chat box. For people who are in the room, if somebody will be a representative and have them, if there's a question, you can raise your hand. And I'm not sure what they're going to do with the mic, but I like this to be a little bit of a dialogue. But people in the Zoom can just put in, are you having sleep problems? Kind of fall into a couple of different categories. There's going to sleep, staying asleep, and then getting up. And it can be disrupted in all of those areas. And one of the things that throws sleep off the quickest is trauma. And no matter how well you're sailing through this moment, this is a collective trauma. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have PTSD around that. That kind of depends on how you respond to it. But this is just a setup for having really bad sleep, and that we're always at home. We kind of have to get out of bed, but we don't have to get out of bed. And so I really want to just kind of tighten things up for you today. And then Sharon's going to be my speak up. If you put something in the chat box, you can put questions in the chat box, and please do if you go along. So why do we sleep? Well, we sleep because our brain needs us to go away for 7 to 8 hours so that it can repair the brain and the body. And when we don't get enough sleep, we have decreased mental and physical repair. We have tension and memory problems. The smart part of our brain, the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, or the frontal lobe, actually decrease in volume, which is just another way of saying we become dumber. And our memory and attention and alertness goes away. Of course, we know that we're going to be fatigued. There's more musculoskeletal pain, depression, anxiety, and weight gain separate from eating more calories. When we are deprived of sleep, we tend to eat more calories. But if that, they've tortured people in labs and found out that they'll gain weight even if they're not eating more calories. So this is, so again, like what studies show is that if we're getting less than 6.5 hours sleep, because people are always like, well, how much sleep should I get? What I know is you should be getting 7 hours of sleep. If you're getting less than that, the studies show again that you're going to have weight gain, inflammation, decreased lifespan, decreased associative problem solving. So what does that mean? So as people, if you're employed, some of you are retired, but you were employed for your associative problem solving. And it's the one thing that computers don't do well. And that is like, when I ask you to think about somebody who might be having sleep issues, like you can probably name a couple of people and a computer can't figure that out, but you can in a second. And when we're not getting enough sleep, we can't put those random facts together as well. And the other thing that happens when we are not getting enough sleep is we are not aware that our cognitive abilities are declining. So they did a study where they took people who were getting enough sleep and they deprived them of sleep, and they did cognitive testing on them. So the first day they came in, they did cognitive tests and they had a pretty high score. They deprived them of sleep. It dropped, and they said that it dropped. And then the next day they deprived them. They were getting 5 hours of sleep. So the second day on 5 hours of sleep, their cognitive scores declined. You know what happened on their third and fourth day is they thought they were recovering from the idea of not getting enough sleep. And they're starting to say, I think I'm fine. Like now that I'm over the hump, I can do this. And I'm wasting like 10, 12 hours of my week by sleeping. And in fact, their cognitive abilities continue to sharply decline. And the reason for that is that our body, when it's in a pickle and things are going horribly, at some point it's like, wow, we are still in hell and we need to keep this person going. And so we're going to tell them that they're fine. And I bet you've all had experiences like that in life where your body's like, it's okay, keep going, right? And we will definitely do that with sleep. So how much sleep should we be getting? Well, it appears to me that we're all adults in the room, but so we should be getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. It is interesting to me that most people actually do better in the highly cognitive world if they can get 9 hours of sleep, because that's where we get memory formation. And if you're around children, and particularly children who are struggling, really look at the number of hours they should be getting, because like an 11-year-old still might need 11 hours of sleep, which means their family needs to be in their home for 12 hours out of the day to get the kid bathed and in bed. So I think it's worth, if you know parents who are struggling with their children, check out how much sleep they're actually getting. Okay. So we're going to talk about how to think about sleep in different segments. And we're going to start with getting up in the morning, because actually how you get up in the morning determines how well you're going to sleep. So part of the reason, some of you may have been experiencing COVID, that like where you usually go to bed at 10, 10:30, then all of a sudden it started to slip to 11:30, 12:30, 2 o'clock. Like it just started to drift. We naturally don't have a 24-hour sleep circadian rhythm. We naturally have a little more than that. So if the structure of our life falls apart, we tend to drift forward on when we want to go to bed, which means that we drift forward on when we're going to get up in the morning. Because if you go to bed at 2 a.m., you are not getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning. And so one of the things that's really important to do is to fix the time that you're going to get up in the morning, plus or minus an hour. So it's okay to be like, I'm going to get up at 7 or 8, but it's not okay to be like, I'm going to get up at 7 or 11. That's too big of a swing and your hormones start to get thrown off. For people who are really fatigued, or some people are waking really anxious in the morning, one of the ways is to have a little bit of juice to get to that prefrontal cortex so that your brain can function. Because when we talked before, and those of you who haven't seen my talks, I'm going to give you a link to a video, but if we go too long without food and our brain starts to panic that it doesn't have enough fuel to make the decisions that it needs, we get an adrenaline hit, and that can either cause a lot of anxiety, or we can actually have such a big hit that we are kind of comatose. And so getting a little bit of juice in the morning is really helpful. And then having a motivation to get out of bed. So the other thing that's really happened in COVID is some of our structure has really fallen apart. And it's important to establish something that you have to get up and do, and connect to somebody is usually helpful within an hour of waking. Any questions about that? Okay. So improving sleep during the day. So one of the ways, so we just woke up, we're waking up consistently at the same time. So we're going to establish that pattern. And then what we do during the day will affect how we go to sleep and stay asleep at night. So one of the things that I think people underappreciate is that naps. And naps are awesome, but you have to kind of do naps right. And so what a nap is generally 20 minutes or 45 minutes. And that's just a part of our sleep cycle. But if you're doing 2 hours, that's either fatigue from some physical health ailment, or that's not getting enough sleep at night, period. And that's going to disrupt your circadian rhythm. And so trying to keep naps shorter, and probably in a normal sleep cycle, if you're going to bed around 10 o'clock, you don't want to do it much later than 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The other thing to watch for is what your caffeine intake is. So the half-life of caffeine is 12 hours. What that means is if you have 2 cups of coffee at 10 a.m., your body still if we measured your bloodstream, it would look like at 10 p.m. that you just drank a full cup of coffee. And so if you're having problems going to sleep, I would suggest that you examine your caffeine intake and switch to decaf. If you're super sensitive, like for me, when COVID got started, I fell into the habit of eating a full chocolate bar almost every day. My sleep got really horrible. And then I was like, oh, it's too much caffeine. That's so sad. I'm going to have to go find other sugar. And then moving your body. Like if you're having problems going to sleep, one of the reasons why people's sleep really got disrupted during COVID is our physical activity went way down, because we weren't walking to our car to get into our car to drive somewhere to walk to the meeting. Like we were just sitting in our house. And so getting a pedometer or using the pedometer on your phone, but really setting a minimum number of steps that you take in a day. And that's different for everybody based on age and health and physical condition and stuff like that. But for somebody who's in pretty good shape physically. You know, the sort of the minimum is about 5,000 steps a day. Questions? Okay. Okay, improving your sleep to go in terms of going to sleep. So the first thing I want you to know about is your sleep clock. So our pituitary is what's in charge of our melatonin release, and melatonin starts to practice being released in the early evenings. So some of you may have noticed, or your spouses may notice, that like around 6 o'clock, you're like, oh, I'm really tired. And then it just kind of goes away and you don't even notice that it disappeared, but you just had this moment where you're just like, whoa. That is your first big melatonin release. You're going to get another pulse of that between 45 minutes and an hour and a half. And so my first melatonin release usually shows up about 6 o'clock, which means the next one's going to show up at 7:30, which means the next one's going to show up at 9 o'clock. And then 10:30. So if I, like last night, because I had to get up at 5:30 to come to this meeting, I knew I generally try and go to sleep at 10:30. But because I was going to get up early and I wanted to, even though I'm just getting up really 45 minutes earlier than I normally do, I needed to have my head on the pillow with the lights out at 9 o'clock so that I could hit that melatonin release so I could just go to sleep. Because otherwise I would have to wait until 10:30 and I would just lay in bed and be agitated. Does that make sense to people? And so tonight, as just pay attention to like when you get those like sloughs where you're like, and just write it down on a piece of paper and notice when it comes by. And whatever that time span is, that becomes pretty predictable. And if you want to go to sleep more easily, making sure that you've brushed your teeth and you've done whatever rituals you do before you go to bed and your head is on the pillow and the lights are out when you get that pulse, because it's like a 5 to 10 minute pulse. It's not very big. And if you miss it, then you got to wait to the next one. Being really aware of what you do in the evenings is really important. And one of the best ways to help you improve your sleep is to assume that your body is the body of a 3-year-old. And so for those of you who had kids, you probably had this pretty structured bedtime ritual with a 3-year-old. You brush your teeth, you get on your jammies, you read a book, you read another book, you go to the bathroom, you get a glass of water. Like, remember that kind of like lengthy ritual you did with kids? We kind of still need to do that with our bodies. So I grew up riding horses and I was a tomboy. And so like when you're riding horses and playing in the dirt all day long, you shower before you go to bed. And so I've always showered at night. And so when I travel to the East Coast to do talks, I take a shower or a bath and my body is like, wow, we think it's 6 o'clock and you're trying to go to bed at 9 o'clock because I got to get up early and do the talk. And all I have to do is take a shower. My body's like, okay, we're going to get ready to go to bed. So having some kind of structured ritual that tells, and sometimes it's drinking tea, like a little bit of chamomile tea or reading a book. Having that ritual is really helpful. The other thing that we have to do, particularly during COVID, and this is just going to be a brutal ask for some of you, is get off the screen an hour before you go to bed. The screen, the light is very stimulating, even if you have the filters on it. And screens are always associated with high levels of mental activity. And I don't care if you're reading a book on Kindle. Some people are very sensitive to that. And I'm like, you got to go back to those paper books. And And then we tend to watch murder mysteries right before we go to bed, which, by the way, then your brain's just encoding that there are awful people in the world, just to let you know. Like, save those for other times besides the hour before bed. Questions about this? Is this helpful to people? It's a little hard from Zoom to make sure that people are finding this useful.
We have one question.
Okay.
And it's around using those glasses with the blue light coating on them while reading something or being on the screen at night. Does that help? Do you think that makes a difference?
It does make a difference. And if you're still having sleep issues, then you should go to the next level, which is a paper book. Like, if you're not having any sleep problems, don't do any of this, right? Like, this is for people who are struggling with sleep. And part of, if you're struggling with sleep, is just taking the time to figure out, what does it take for me to get a good full 8-9 hours of sleep? Like, go to bed when I want, stay asleep when I want, and get up when I want. And then you can pull back from that because you don't like it, but at least you know what it takes for your body to go to sleep. Hopefully that's helpful.
Hey, Kristen, this is Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Quality of sleep, though. I mean, hours under the covers doesn't really equate to quality, right? How do you, I guess, quantify that quality in your opinion?
Yeah, so quality of sleep, like, the first thing I want is people to rest for 8 hours. I'm a horrible sleeper. I've just never been a good sleeper. And so anything will wake me up. I go to sleep, get down into deep sleep, and then I float near consciousness for a while and go down. And what I have found, for me to have good energy in the day, is that I need to be in bed for a minimum of 8 hours a day. And sometimes that is sleeping, and sometimes that is me just being like, I know that I'm awake and my eyes are closed, and I'm going to rest here so that my body and brain can recover from what I did during the day. And as we age, what studies show is, as we age, what happens is we go down into deep sleep troughs, and then we come up and we float at the top, and then we drop back down. But we don't notice when we become unconscious. And so people will come into my office and they're like, I'm never sleeping. I haven't gotten any sleep in 6 weeks or whatever. And I'm like, you would be psychotic if that was true. Like, people who are actually not sleeping quickly become psychotic. And I get that, you can get a sleep app and you can put it underneath your pillow and you can see, and it's looking for how much you're wiggling. And you can see that people are actually getting 4 or 5 hours of deep sleep. But what they're doing is they're dismissing the importance of shallow sleep. And quite honestly, we're grieving and craving the sleep that we got as kids, where, and if you've been around a little kid, like, they go out and you can be like, and they're like, right? Like, they are out. And we really wish that to happen. It's just, it's harder for the adult brain to do that.
Great. And what about the devices that, like, Fitbits and Apple Watches, whatever other technologies out there? Do you think those are reliable measures of?
Yeah, I think they're pretty reliable measures. And one of the things that they're most reliable about is they'll tell you how long you have been quiet in bed, even if you're not asleep, but just like not busy doing things. And you can, and what I've seen it help people is, like, you have to not get too perfectionist about it, but like, what does it take to optimize my sleep so that I feel great in the day? Because remember, you're not optimizing sleep so that the sleep is good. You're optimizing sleep so that you feel good during the day. And so I've had days where I'm laying in bed and I'm like, oh, this is going to be really crappy sleep. And I get up and my day's fine. And I was like, your sleep was fine. Like, you're not tired. right? It's when you're so tired that you start getting dysfunctional that you really need to spend time on the sleep. And what I've seen in COVID is that people who are not getting consistent sleep are not doing well in COVID. And they're like, no, it's because of COVID. And I'm like, no, it's because your brain is not having the time to adjust to the new reality.
Thank you.
Yep. So then, since I'm kind of like, yeah, screen should go away an hour before bed, which is just like this crazy ass. But almost all of us in the room remember there was a time when there were no computers. We are all old enough to remember that we were not always in front of a screen, right? And so what did we do with that time, right? Well, we read books and we did just jigsaw puzzles and we talked to friends and listened to music and we colored or folded origami. Gratitude journals, so important right now. Like the research on gratitude journals, like, and what you want to do is you want to write what you're grateful for, like the happy bucks, and why. And it's just like doing happy bucks, and writing it at the end of the day really makes a difference for mental health. Games, board games, praying, meditating, and doing yoga or Tai Chi or stretching are just a short list. So what happens if you're waking in the middle of the night? And usually you're waking in the middle of the night for 2 hours. And the committee's like, blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. He said, and I should have said, and da, 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 and we got to do this, right? So, okay, some of you are going to not be very happy with me when I say this, but alcohol is one of the biggest disruptors for sleep.
You lost the audience.
I know, gone. Like they walked out of the building. Sorry. And I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just telling you the facts, right? So alcohol at or after dinner can cause early morning waking, and you can test to eliminate it. But if you're like, no, I'm not going to eliminate it, then I would go back to my previous talk and make sure you eat protein right before you go to bed. And have right at your bedstand a little bit of juice and a handful of nuts. Because what's happening is the alcohol is getting cleared from your body. There's not enough glucose for your brain. And your brain's waking up and saying, wow, we're starving to death. There's a bear in the room. And that's why you're waking up with this like jumbled brain going 100 miles an hour. And getting a little bit of juice and nuts in will make a difference. Sometimes eating protein right before you bed, you're basically throwing the protein in and saying, eat this, don't eat me. So eating protein 30 minutes before you go to bed to fuel the brain, have a lizard brain treat, quarter cup of juice, handful of nuts. Remove the screens from particularly your phone, right? The minute your brain is halfway fueled, it's gonna be like, hey, let's go play with our toy. And it knows that it's there, and it will be like, oh, we got to go find out what's happening in the news, or we got to go look at that, right? Like, and I've had many people say, well, then how am I going to have an alarm to get up? And I tell them that there's these things that you can buy on Amazon. They're called clocks, and they're standalone, and they have alarms in them. So mostly if you're having a lot of problems with sleep, I'm like, pull the screens from the bedroom. And then if people are really having a lot of problems with sleep, I'm like, yeah, let's not use the bed for watching TV and eating and doing anything but sleep and sex. So the body's like, yep, these are the only two things that happen on a bed. Questions? Anybody in the room? Everybody left already? Okay.
No.
So I'm going to put this in the chat box, but for those of you who don't have a chat box, so there's and I'll go, I think I'll have time. Maybe not. So I put together all my best worksheets and handouts, because usually when I come visit, I'm like, hey, here's a worksheet or handout. And this website has that. And let me put put it in the chat box. Wait. Oh, I have to stop sharing. So I'll put it in the chat box when I get to the end of my slide deck. Here's my book. Fuel Your Brain, Not Your Anxiety. I went on Amazon today and we have the #1 release for obsessive compulsive disorders, which this book is not about obsessive compulsive disorders at all. I don't know why we're #1, but we'll take it because we're #1 new release. I don't know how they decide what category you're in. But if you liked my talk, the information in the past, basically this book builds out that information on how to fuel your brain. And the one request that I have is if you get the book and you like the book, would you please do an Amazon review? Because what's going to happen next, the reason why we wrote this book is because Natasha and I want to start working with disadvantaged populations that don't know how to feed their brain. And we're going to create online programs, and we want to get, we want to do fundraising for that, because we're going to form a nonprofit. And it would be super helpful if we had 100 reviews of our book. And so our goal is to get 100 reviews by June. So if you feel so motivated to help us do that, that would be awesome.
Kristen, we have a question from Dennis.
Oh, great.
Oh, going back to your earlier slide where it showed if you're up more than 2 hours at night, I really don't have that problem, but I wake up, let's say I wake up every 2-3 hours and, either go back to sleep or read for 10 minutes and then go back to sleep. So if you accumulate 9 hours of sleep in that manner, is that equivalent to just sleeping for 9 hours? Or is that not as good as continuous sleep?
Yeah. So can I ask you a personal question?
Yeah, sure.
And I'll ask it and then you can decline to answer it. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being plenty of energy in the day and 1 being I'm not going to get out of bed even though the house is burning down, and 5 is I'm just getting by. How's your energy during the day?
7, maybe.
7. That's pretty good. Like I like people to be 7 or 8 or 9. So what I would do is I would eat a little bit of protein before you go to bed and see if you're not waking so frequently.
Okay, sure.
And then what's more important than that you're not waking so frequently is that you ask yourself, do I have more energy for that during the day?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that was a great question. I appreciate us sort of problem solving that. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Oh, great. Go ahead.
And that is, can you talk to the idea of, I'm going to call it sleep banking. Like if I get only 6 hours tonight, but I'm able to get 9 or 10 hours the next night, does it kind of even out? Do you get enough sleep over the few days if you can bank some sleep?
So if you once a month get 6 hours of sleep and then I don't really care. If on Mondays you get 6 hours of sleep and on Tuesdays you get 9 hours of sleep and on Wednesday you're back to 6 and on Thursday you do 6 and then Friday you catch up again, that's really rough on your body because it just doesn't know what's going to happen. And so your brain, your hormones really want to know what the predictable pattern is. And so when people have a work schedule where it gets shortened up and then lengthened, what I tell them, as much as possible, always get up at the same time every day. That's your anchor. And if you need more sleep, go to bed earlier or take naps.
Okay.
But anchoring when you get up in the morning is really important. It's an hour. And our tendency is to anchor going to bed. And it's more important to anchor getting up.
Okay. Well, in my job as an airline pilot, I am constantly going to bed at different times and
Right.
waking up at different times in different time zones.
Zones, yeah.
And all I do is, like last night, I went to bed at just about 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I just said, what's 8 hours from now? That's
Yeah.
when I'm going to get up. And
Yeah.
I
So
try and get 8 hours of sleep, but going to bed and waking up completely at different times, but just trying to be in bed for 8 hours.
yeah, I forgot that you're an airline pilot. So I've worked with airline pilots, and you guys, like, because you're like your whole system's completely disrupted. What you're doing is exactly right. Like you want to just stay as close to the rhythm within the frame that you're in. You know, so when you finish work, you have a few hours and then you go to bed, depending on when you have to fly next, right? Like, I think that's really smart. The thing that has helped pilots the most that I've worked with is to have a really clear ritual of it's time to go to bed. Like my ritual of like, I take a shower and then I go to bed, so that your body's super clear, even though it doesn't know what time zone you're in, that like you're saying that the next activity is sleep.
Okay.
And that's really helped them get better sleep. And so the two things that I've seen with pilots work is either a cup of like sleepy time tea, and just like read a book and just like quiet down, turn off the TV and just like, okay, I'm gonna have, or meditation or prayer or gratitude journals, and then shower.
All right, great.
Hey, Kristen,
Yep.
the other profession that seems to be relevant to is your own. I have been told anyhow over the years that in medical school and in residency, I don't know if it's a hazing process or what, but I've been told that the students are expected to put in like 12, 14, 16-hour shifts and go with little or no sleep for long periods of time. I've always wondered what's the logic behind that and what's the impact?
The impact has been measured. There's plenty of studies that show that it endangers health, and they continue to do it because that lowers healthcare costs.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I'm a naturopath, so I'm happy to be like, it may lower healthcare costs, but it's also increasing healthcare costs because of errors. So, so that's why they continue to do it. I'm not really of that system. So, and nobody in that system has asked my opinion. So, I think I have just time for one more question.
Yeah, that would be good. One more. If there is one.
Let me make sure. Did everybody get the link to my website? And for those of you on, you can do a screenshot. And then my book. So I always like to wrap things up with like, so now that you have this information, like what can you do today? And what experiment are you willing to do today to improve your sleep? And if you can share that with somebody as you're leaving the room, the likelihood of you doing it goes way up. Usually I will wrap around the room, but we don't quite have time for that. So share that with somebody that you heard this talk and you're going to try an experiment to improve your sleep. And that's it.
Super. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. A lot of information packed in there, and